My name is Michael and I'm the founder of Flock. I hope you're well. I hope you're looking forward to the webinar and to the beautiful day today. In the next 30 minutes or so, we will be discussing how COVID-19 is accelerating culture change across industries with our lovely guest, Jeremy Blain, who is a fantastic culture transformation professional with some great experience, who I believe will be properly introduced by Dan in a second. So once we finish, we will leave some time for questions. So don't be shy. If you have any questions, you can add them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. And then we will answer them at the end. So for those who don't know, Dan and I co-founded Flock. It's a tech platform that helps you to improve team productivity. But rather than focusing on skills and experience, we use data and science to build stronger cultures, improve engagement, retention of your remote teams. So for everyone who signed up today, we'll share a present from us. So you can use our platform for free for your own remote team. So feel free to get in touch if you have any questions. And also, this is our first webinar that we are planning to run them on a monthly basis. So, watch out for more announcements next month. I think that's it from me for now. I'll leave it to Dan.
Thank you very much, Mikhail. Just making sure that everyone can hear me. And of course, as we say in the business, the emergency exit are here, here, and here. But of course, you all know that. A bit of fun, of course. Now, the other thing, of course, is that today there are no fire drills for today. So if you do hear a fire drill noise in any way, please vacate your local facility because it's down to you. You're on a Zoom call. So obviously, if I hear it here as well, of course, I'll do the same. Joking aside, I'm on a ground floor flat, so that should be okay. However, there might be some ambient noises in the background of mine because today they have decided, bringing my full sense to work, they have decided that they're going to do the gardens and things today. So today we won't be interrupted by Mia and the dog and other people, but we might be by some gardening noise. So I'll mute myself after I've asked questions, if that's okay with everyone else. If we can try to turn our phones off if we can and get our notepads and papers out, I'm doing the same because, of course, I had forgotten to turn my phone off. What a amateur mistake that would have been. There you go. Now it's gone off. Right, good. Excellent. Right, the reason why I say slightly nervous, I must confess, I am slightly nervous because Jeremy knows it. Jeremy might not know this, but I'm a bit of a fan of our speakers today. And so it's a great experience to have him here. Chatted to him a number of times, listened to him loads of times. Of course, I know, I'll be honest with you, he's award-winning. He is actually a global thought leader. This is the reality of Jeremy. He is awesome. He's chief executive professional of the Performance Works International. I knew you before this, but there we go. We've been doing this for a good time. So he talks around the world on what we're going to talk about today. He is, I say, a thought leader, but also I won't say controversial because that's not the right terminology. But strap in because the way he thinks about things is going to be the future of things. Now, you don't become award-winning for nothing, and so it's a huge honour to have him here today. To be hosting in my own little way, if I possibly can. I'll try not to talk too much. I'll ask questions. Also, we said about the chat bot, the chat box. I'll try to moderate some of that as we go. Hopefully everyone's now here. That was me just filling in, as I knew a few people that definitely wanted to be hearing it weren't here. I'm just filling in for those people. So the first question that I have, and it's a big one to start off with, but of course, how is this whole situation, the whole COVID-19 or coronavirus, how is this accelerating business transformation? And I'm put that, of course, to our keynote speaker first, to Jeremy. So over to you, sir.
Thanks very much, Dan. I am now going to hire you as my public relations expert, no doubt about it. I haven't had quite an introduction like that, so the pressure's on, isn't it? Well, COVID-19 as an accelerator is a really interesting question, but I want to take you back in time, first of all. It's 20 weeks ago, just 20 weeks ago. 20 weeks ago, we were already coming out of a period of uncertainty. We'd come from a 10, 11-year global financial crisis. We had the China-US trade war still sort of depressing markets, not just in Asia, but impacting the rest of the world. And in our businesses, we were entering the new decade with an urgent and important need for the hashtag digital transformation, which I would argue is the wrong terminology for today, which I'll come to. According to Forbes and Oracle and IBM, 84% of organizations coming into this decade were failing in digital transformation. And that's because they were missing one key element, and that's the implementation element and bringing the people with you. So the human side of the digital touch, if you like. So that's why, for me, digital transformation is not the right word. It's whole business transformation. One thing that was missed was a huge piece, really, and it's leaders which were the ones really that weren't ready. I did a piece of research in 2019, the state of digital transformation across 3 continents, showed that 40% of all leaders surveyed were just not ready for this. And therefore, the execution into the business was really half-cocked, and it wasn't communicated effectively, missing one big human trend that was happening, which is the rise of the blended workforce, which is another piece of research I've done today. That proposes that our workforce mix is changing to build not just with your permanent employees, but permanent part-time, obviously more remote working right now, the rise of the independent workforce fueled by the gig economy. And in the survey that I did this year called the Blended Workforce Revolution, we predicted that within 5 years, this was in February when we launched this, that 50% of any workforce globally would be made up of independent workers, contractors, other stakeholders. That, however, in COVID-19, we've been back to our survey set, and that is now predicted by the end of 2022. So in other words, talking to Michal and Dan are now, half of the population of Manchester within 1.5 years will be independent workers. That's before we got to COVID-19. And that has been the biggest catalyst of digital transformation since the iPhone was launched in 2007, which is rather frightening, being that, as Dan knows, I've been banging on about this for absolutely years. The operational manifestation of what this fast-tracked transformation has been having is the adoption of digital in remote working, how we do these things, meetings, in how we work, how we market our products. And for me, particularly in my business, the huge need now in terms of mastering the virtual sell and mastering virtual service. Everyone's scurrying to learn from call centers at the moment, from what I can see. It's highlighting the very best in class at the moment. In the UK, Vodafone and Moobaloo, those kind of companies that had fast-tracked already their digital transformation, are faring better. Elsewhere around the world, traditional businesses in the banking and finance, like DBS in Singapore, Ping An in China, have moved ahead of this and have been ready for this change. So while the pandemic was a surprise, they've been ready to shift their business. However, what it's also exposing are non-capable leaders. And Dr. Richard Foster from Yale talked about the S&P 500 failure rate. He said in 1920, the failure rate of companies was approximately 67 years. That's how long it would take them to go through their cycle and fail. By the end of 1919, that had already reduced to 15 years. And the prediction in the next 9 months is that that will reduce again to 8 years. And that's the top companies. We're already seeing other companies making those moves. So the 2 pieces of ingredients of success to sort of end with on this piece, in this accelerated time of where the pandemic is really boosting this move forward, are 2 things: speed and perfection. Speed trumps size these days. It is getting to market first, doing things quicker, adopting digital quicker, jumping over that big chasm and getting on board with remote working. And perfection. We don't need a perfect product. We don't need to be perfect when we do it. I'm sure many of you have attended things like this and they've not been perfect, but that's kind of the way. I talked about Ping An Insurance in China, who's probably one of the best proponents of this sort of transformation. And they said that, you know, if we're not quick enough, a company like ours, a 70% solution can kill us. So it's that sort of version 1, if you like. I'm not sure how many times Elon Musk took to get his space rocket up there, but that is the point. It's versioning and it's speed. That's my first pieces of input for you, Dan. Maybe Michael can add something.
Just literally just astounding. Like literally as I was talking about how great it is. So literally within about 4 minutes, not only do I learn that I've been talking about digital transformation and that's been wrong for 5 years, which is fair enough because I'm hearing that and I'm with you. I think we have been using the wrong terminology, but it's a good hashtag I've been using. But also your point, which is brilliant, which is very much echoed by I don't know if people on the call have listened to Tom Cheesewright and others, but he's talking about the high frequency change pace. And he was doing this, talking about this, of course, before COVID, as a lot of people were, myself included. And he was talking about how it doesn't need to be perfect, but we've got to all realize that this high frequency is getting quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker. And as you said about the cycles of companies, I mean, that's astounding. Just imagine how scary it must therefore be to have these huge beasts of companies. Luckily for Flock, as a very small and agile team, and so we use speed and agility. With that, I'll pass it over to the boss. So, Mikhail, what's your thoughts?
Yes, so we definitely know the speed and perfection side of things. Get into the market as quick as possible is definitely the key. And I think the quicker bigger companies realize that, the better. But I just wanted to echo your point around the digital transformation. So I've been hearing digital transformation for years now, but hardly anything being done. So now we have this new transformation leader who's called COVID-19, right? And whether you like it or not, you will change anyway. And we are changing anyway, so we might as well do it right. And to do that, you need to be able to, have this speed and perfection in the way you work and the way you lead others. So I have a question back at you, actually, Jeremy. So do you think that the changes that are happening now during COVID-19 will, once it's all over, will they accelerate, slow down, revert? I found this piece of research around remote work. So Gallup conducted this research and found that over 50% of employees would leave their jobs for another one that provides remote work. So it seems like if the market is still candidate driven, companies will have to adapt, will have to do more remote work. Do you think that all the other changes around, being more agile at work, will that accelerate or will it go back to the normal based on your experience?
It's a good question, and it does relate to some of the comments in the chat at the moment. Another point that I've been very passionate about is that technology should enable, not overwhelm. And we get stuck. Part of the reasons why the so-called digital transformation has failed is that it seemed that many organizations, leadership teams were looking at technology as the thing. This was the thing that we needed to do. So let's go for the next fad and fashion and put it in. And some companies found, well, it doesn't work. And that's the case for now. One of the problems of the accelerated times now will be that people will fast track some of these. Some will find that some of the technologies that they're using are not appropriate. Some will find that it's working quite well. They've got to rapidly find the technology, the digital platforms that provide an ecosystem for their businesses so that they can operate and unleash the human touch. Because I would argue in the digital era that the human touch is more important than ever. So those companies post-COVID that will flourish will not even be talking about the technology because it will just be there to enable a new form of human touch. So we've already heard from companies like PwC, Barclays, McKinsey, Twitter, Spotify, that some are not going back to offices till 2021. Twitter, not ever. If you don't want to, it's a choice. And again, company like PwC and McKinsey saying that actually we think that we can take away a third of our office space and truly enable our people. I think this will unleash the age of empowerment, actually. Leadership at all level. And as you know, I call that kind of unleashing the inner CEO of our people, because that is where we need a kind of a more collective approach to where the business is going. So technology that enables to unleash the human power.
And again, I reiterate how wonderful all that is to hear, and proving, of course, you obviously are, a global in your outlook, because I have a feeling some of that outlook comes from different places. It isn't Britain, dare I say, and maybe not even the West in some respects. And I think it's that holistic viewpoint, which is absolutely key. You had a point there about technology stack. I'm going to come back to that one if I can at the end, because I know I have a particular question around that, but also Sharon Green also pointed out on Twitter, which is absolutely right. But your point around that whole technology piece, enabling people to do things much more productively, absolutely. We did a tiny bit of research. I'm just looking at it now ourselves at Flock. We did a bit of research about the next question, which is around the future work being remote working. And 42% of people said they'd like to do almost 100% remote work, which before this would have been insanely high. But of course, now it seems to be commonplace. Cisco just did something much, much bigger, about 100 times bigger, and actually found a higher number. I know LinkedIn in certain professions, it's even higher, 85% in tech and about 93% in financial services. So amazing new times. And this is my segue, terrible segue, into as businesses had to, the next question, which is around, as businesses had to switch to remote working almost overnight, and of course it's not the new normal. What do you think will be the kind of the watch outs and the best remote work practices? Not only for yourself, of course, but also for your clients. So I'm going to start off, of course, with Jeremy on that one. So what are the best practices for your remote work practice and this kind of transformation that's, as you said, Mikhail rightly said, has been foisted upon us with remote working and working from home?
Actually, it kind of reminded me, Dan, I've just done a piece of research on this as well, which is how dispersed teams are working in remote times during COVID-19. And there's some really good stuff coming from that. But two things to start with. The first is to reiterate, this is not the new normal yet. This is not normalized remote working. Many of us with kids at home, we might be homeschooling, we have other distractions, we might have another partner working at home. And if we can start to navigate all of that and start to create the disciplines and best practices, then when it does normalize, then we're ahead of the game. But I'll go back 20 weeks again, if I may, first of all, because there's a great piece of data from Small Business Genius, which I kind of read like a cartoon, like watching a cartoon where the eyes pop out, go to the screen and come back. It said in January 2020, 44% of all companies globally did not allow remote working. 1 week later, after their survey, 80% of them were scrabbling to get to remote working. And it is no wonder that some are getting it right and some are getting it wrong, because the legacy of not having a sort of transformation mindset in place, at leadership level and at organizational level, will make it doubly hard. But also we've got to consider the industries that kind of that had previously raised what I now call myths, which are, it won't work in this industry. How do I know people won't be distracted? People are just going to start playing games. These are old school 20th century attitudes, and it's forced people to start thinking in 21st century kind of ways of thinking, like many new businesses. In our own survey, we found, unsurprisingly, 80% of businesses were not prepared for this. And one of the key issues were that, and I can see a lot of this coming in the chat as well as I'm looking in the chat, is that this has been forced on people. It's not been thought through. There hasn't been enough work on mindset first, at leadership level and management level about what that works, but also bringing people along with you. So the key things that have come out of this in terms of roadblocks and things that are working in terms of best practices, these at macro level, those organizations that are trying to replicate the office in the remote world are failing. This is causing over communication, confusion, unstructured working, unsupported working, and agendas which put so much pressure on the people. That's the first thing. Yeah. Sorry, yeah, go ahead, Dan.
No, I'm just literally saying, absolutely right and too true. I think that's exactly the problem, isn't it? That people are trying to replicate the office, and we're still trying to go back. The skeuomorphism, as the old saying goes, and people are looking at this new normal and saying, "Oh God, I hope it goes back to normal." And of course, that's insane. So a chap, Brian Solis, said this morning, had a comment on one of the things we posted, and he said, "What was it now? It's the normal now that we're looking at. This isn't the new normal; it's the normal now, and we are going to have this transition period." So what was your second point?
So the second point is operationally how that is manifesting itself in terms of roadblocks is that those managers that haven't been used to remote management have got what I call management fever. They're micromanaging, they're over diarising, they're booking in meetings, coaching sessions or reporting sessions with their team, and nobody's getting to their own work. And that's because we don't have the rules, tools, we don't have the skills, or even the thrills in place anymore. And I say thrills in terms of we're not making this motivational, engaging, fun. We're not doing enough on health and wellness of our people. There's a big piece. And I think just to finalize, the pieces actually that are working, the best practices that are emerging, is a greater acceptance and embracing of asynchronous working. So working which isn't necessarily driven by my diary, time by time, task by task, dependencies with other people in the business, how we do things based on old or legacy processes. This is where I can kind of get on board myself. People are talking about frogs and tomatoes at the moment. First is eating the frog, which is get the piece of work done, which is most important first, as the first thing in your day. And the second is the Pomodoro technique, which is a great way to structure your work remotely. But I won't explain that now, but you can Google that to have a look if you're not familiar with it. I use it. It's absolutely brilliant.
And I love about you're saying things that we've done at Flock, but also as in startup and tech world. And these are kind of old habits, as you say, they're brand new to a lot of people. And a lot of people haven't thought this way. So you say it's that I especially think it might be the middle management and the people that aren't necessarily needed in this bit. I feel that, to be honest, I'm almost middle management here, because I'm going to pass it over to Mikkel, and I'm not really needed. I'm just here as a buffer. So Mikkel, what was your answer for this one?
Well, so I think, you're completely right. There's so many good things around remote work, right? You can minimize cost per employees. You can increase your candidate pool. People are happier, stay with you for longer. But if it's not managed effectively, then it can, actually have a negative impact on your business. If you overmanage people, they can burn out. Or there's another aspect of remote work, which is called isolation. If people feel isolated at work, research finds that people then are less productive than their peers. So on one hand, you've got this amazing remote work that can bring you a lot of benefits. On the other hand, if you don't have those tools, if you can't operate in this new operating system, then it can actually have a negative effect on your business. So I think it's essential to provide the skills and best practices to employees and managers so they can learn how to operate in that new operating system. And we always talk about that we need those skills, and it's so we just don't know what it is, right? It sounds so complicated, but in fact, it's not that complicated. We've been doing this, right? You can do simple activities, and I think the key is to do them on a regular basis to make sure you emphasize the importance of a certain core driver in your business. Like, for example, in our team, I work 24/7 all the time, and if I don't have any boundaries, I'll just burn out within a month.
That is true.
And so we had to do a simple thing which is called successful day at work. Start of the day, you say, this is what we're going to do. Once you do it, then the simple question that you ask is, have you had a successful day at work? If you did, that's it, you're done, and you don't need to work all night. And that's that helps me with just having simple tasks every day. And if you do it on a daily basis, that helps you with the management of your team. And there's a lot of activities like that you can use to gradually implement, effective remote work within your team.
I think there's lots and lots of different ones, and what I'm just going to echo around our kind of our own objective thinking, but also to make it absolutely clear that there are lots of different tools out there. Flock is not the only tool that you would use to either manage or assign the values of your team, but using Flock and a range of other ones is going to be pretty important, because when you start to learn about your remote team a bit more, because we're not going to get back to that world, or it might take a while to get back to the world where you can use your normal management and HR techniques. So you have to start embracing not just Flock. It's not just about Flock. We're talking about 4 or 5 or 6 different tools that you can use to help manage your remote teams. Hugely important. Now, of course, I'm going to say Flock's very important because it's the values underneath it, but there are other ones available. But of course, there's other things like the basic tools like Zoom, etc. But Jeremy's absolutely right. We are looking at the moment and we're going, well, Zoom can be used for everything. So it's a hammer. And of course, half the time we haven't got nails. We've got much more complicated things than that. So what I'm going to do is make sure that this Zoom call doesn't last for like an hour and a half. I'd love it to, by the way. I'd absolutely love it to last for like a whole day. But I'm pretty weird with these things, and I'm pretty used to them. But I know that we've got a third question as well, and then we've got a couple of questions from the audience as well. So I'm going to go for that one if that's okay, chaps. So around essential skills. So it does link into the use of tools and cool stuff and learning about these things and having an open mindset, as Jeremy rightly says, and having this new way of thinking. But chicken or egg, many organizations have cut their learning budgets, because of course businesses are under pressure. Now, that makes absolute sense. But in our new ways of working, and it requires these kind of new knowledge and new skills and behavior, what do you think they should really be doing? How can we, or how should we, equip our managers with the essential skills during this challenging time? I mean, that is basically bread and butter for Jeremy. So I'm going to let you go first, because this is what you do on a global basis. Well,
there is those of you who are kind of into the learning professionals and drive learning, you know that the adage that we need to unlearn and relearn new skills, and there's no greater relevance now. It's to unlearn what we have done before and retune it, relearn how to do things, experiment and accept that we might fail a little bit first, and then learn from it and implement. That has to be supported. Those companies that are actively providing budget behind this really understand it. Those that don't, then can actually unleash that, fix that frozen middle that I've seen in the chat there, the management who really can make a difference. And that is the difference now between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. In 2013, I think it was, Michael Bloomberg, who is now no longer standing for president in the US, said that, this remote working will never catch on. There's no substitute for these water cooler moments, etc. And I kind of get that to a certain extent. We all need that human touch. I do, of course we do. Richard Branson in the same year said, we'll look back in 30 years' time, we'll wonder why we ever had offices at all when we have the enabling tech. And when we have the enabling tech and we can then repurpose our management to be more coaching and growth focused, that is where we can start to really unleash the skills that are needed for, remote working, remote selling, remote customer engagement, all of those things. So the first thing that needs to happen, I think, in organizations is that many actually need to communicate how to communicate, because at the moment they are over communicating and not always in laser guided fashion. They need to do less, not more, and high power. And respect and have what I would call time integrity. So respect other people's time. That's one of the problems for management, I think, that they will need to unlearn, relearn, is to take a step back and be supportive and enable and empower versus manage, supervise and performance manage, those kind of things, as well as having the health and tech aspects in place.
Which is of course the classic difference between and you guys and people on the call know this more than I do. I'm just a tech and marketing guy, but it's the difference between management and leading, isn't it? So we actually do need inner CEOs. We need to have our people become leaders of themselves and as their own right. Now, of course, we have that lots in the startup world and the tech world because of the very nature of being, if that makes sense, in small teams. But I'm not going to change the question. I almost did then, Mikhail, which would have been naughty of me, and I would have been told off. So I'm not going to change the question. I'm going to pass it on to Mikhail, though. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, so just really quickly, before we head to questions. So yeah, I completely agree. And I think regardless we stay remote or we go back to the office, we will change anyway. It will be a new environment that we work in, and we will have to adapt. And if we don't, we will lose out. So that's why I believe culture is king right now, because we don't have this face-to-face time, and everyone is different. So some people will be more prone to work remotely. They can work autonomously. They don't need any contact with others. They just like working on their own. And some others, like me, I just need to speak to others on a regular basis. Otherwise, I just don't want to work at all. So I think first thing is to recognize how different people are and how you can adapt the way you work with them, communicate, modify your behavior based on their profiles. And that's why we develop Flock. And I think you need to adapt the motivations, but also if people feel isolated, then if I didn't have those regular chats with Dan or anyone in my team, I would just be unproductive. And this is, again, a very simple solution that you can do to make sure that people are feeling not isolated.
Yeah, and that very much links into the values thing, doesn't it? I mean, we've got 8 different points of your value tree or your spire diagram. And if autonomy on mine, for example, is very, very high, because I have always been quite an autonomous unit. And so therefore it's very high on mine. So I've been remote working without realizing it for years. So I've been working from home, remote working, doing these things without realizing it would become fashionable. In fact, for about at least 90% of my working life, it's been very unfashionable, if not 99%. There you go. But of course, it all changes now. I think what we're trying to echo, I think in the chat, I'm just going to bring it up like this, is will these new normal bits stick? And I think we all can understand, I'm hoping now, that it's a transition period. This is not the new normal. It's going to be the now normal, and we will be transitioning. And I'm hoping that the managerial, it'll be interesting to see, do managers need to learn to become leaders? And that is the issue. And I'm wondering how they could do that. But I think that's just, I almost changed the question there, didn't I? That was a bit naughty of me. But anyway, I'm going to also ask a couple of questions because we got one from, is that okay, chaps, if I go straight into the other questions now? Is that all right? Because I'm being very aware of time, you see. There you go. I was listening as well as doing things. I was listening to. It's just a great talk. But anyway, so question from Sharon Green, and it came a few days ago on Tech Tuesday. So thanks for that, because it was tech motivated as well. It's such a big question that I think it most probably will be something we'll do a whole webinar on, but there we go. So her question is, it's a frequent client one, which is, how do you sort out the tech hype from the tech superstars that are really going to take a business to the next level? And I think it's just a brilliant question. So I'm gonna be cheeky, and I'm gonna pop that one over to Jeremy first, even though he's had no prep time. So if you would like instead for me to give an answer and then you go first, what would you like to do? Would you like to go first, or do you want me to?
Whatever you like, I don't mind.
Hey, we're here to listen to you. Go, you go first.
Right. Well, actually, looking at this in a slightly different way, any company that is geared for success in the 20th century is doomed to failure in the 21st. And that is all about how you're adopting the appropriate technologies, not technology for the sake of it, not the things that appear to be what everybody talks about right now because that's the fashion and the fad, but because it actually works for your business. So those that will post-COVID seek to go back a step to how things were are on the wrong road in my view. What the opportunity is now is to actually embrace and learn so much more about these digital technologies that are in place. Uncover the champions in your own business that probably exist right now. I think there's a good comment that comes here which goes to a point around this is actually removing diversity, inclusion, bias barriers, and bringing out a more collective approach to leadership. And if that flattens structures and everybody's looking at this problem and can contribute at technology level as well as the human level, then I think the two things together actually are the most important things to move companies forward, not just the tech and not just the human.
You see, and because I know you so well, I was thinking to myself, oh, don't let Jeremy go first, because what he's going to say is tech isn't really that important, and actually it's people and tech. And now you're going to say this is the answer to the question, which doesn't really work. But there you go.
Over to you, Dan.
No, obviously, as the tech guy, or tech guy as I am, I'm going to kind of I'm going to answer the question in a little bit, but I think you're absolutely right, by the way. It's how people use the tools in front of them, not just the tools. But the other point that you made, which is absolutely right, if you're in quite a large organization or a larger organization, use the people, because the people power and the knowledge-based power of your people, you will have people that know about marketing tools that the marketing tool department do not know about. There's a reason why. There are 8,492 different MarTech companies, SaaS companies at the moment. Now, Jerry covered that'll explode. So you can't basically, there's no answer to it, except there is a bit of an answer. So I'll give you a bit of an answer. If you use something like Grid 2 is called, there's an absolute answer for you. And you can basically see how people vote on pieces of technology they use. Yeah. And you can see not run by, I'm not going to take the rip out of Forrester and Gardner and other people, but sometimes, some of these consultants are getting paid by the companies that they are, doing the things for. Grid 2 is not that. It's literally a bit like using Waze to find out your way through a traffic jam. It's the same thing. It's crowdsourced information. So it's awesome. It's called Grid 2. So use that to kind of find out the best tech tools for your business. Because of course, there's so many tech tools out there that it depends on the size of your business, depend on what your objectives are. Ironically, this is the digital transformation of the tech expert. It's basically what Grid 2 is on a crowd-funded source package, which of course is the future way of looking at the world. So it actually proves your point, Jeremy, that it is people too. I'm going to let Mikhail jump in as well, because he's given me that nod, which basically means Dan, stop talking about it.
No, all I wanted to do, I completely agree with Jeremy. So it's technology and people. And I think the key is that you will, in a large organization, you will have people who inherently want you to not change and stay where you are, who set in this 20th century company. And you will have people who are much more adaptable and agile, who want to champion the new culture. I think that, the first step is to be able to identify who is where, and then adapt the way you work with them to take you on the journey on this 21st century. And for tech companies it will be easier, but I did see, we work, for example, with a manufacturing company called Trolex. So they've been on this journey as well. So I think it can be industry agnostic. It will just be more challenging for some industries.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be part of it, isn't it? It's the challenge. But as we rightly said, we started this morning talking about coronavirus and COVID, and it being the kind of foisted upon us reason for transformation in our business, and we can't not realise that is the case. I look outside on a beautiful sunny day, and the canal's there, and people are running around, and people are biking, and the rest of it. But we've got to remember that coronavirus, even though the government might say to us, "Oh, don't worry about it now," I'm not going to start that conversation. But the reality is it's there. It's a global pandemic. It's there. And the reality is that we will need to accelerate changes in our own business, be that 1 meter distance or remote working or whatever we're going to do. If that's okay, I'm going to pick up on a question that I'm just proving I can't multitask, that I've just now lost. I really liked it. So that's a real shame. So yeah, I'm going to ask another question, if that's okay. Not about cementing the changes, not about what the tech needs to be, but more about what are the values do you think, and this is going to put Jeremy on the spot because we haven't prepped it at all. What are the values do you think that you talk about this new cultural mindset, so to speak, what are the values do you think people are going to need to recruit for? Because I truly believe this is the future of things. We're going to have to recruit on values, not on skill set, because skill set in the global sense of the word will be exploded. And so you'll be able to pick the very best talent from around the world. Whether you want to or not, that is the new potential situation. So what do you think of the values are that people will need to recruiting for this new, I'm about to say new normal, the irony, this new not normal, but this transition period and actually in the future? Jeremy. Yeah.
Thanks. I think a lot of the values and behaviours that are present now and how we're recruiting are still relevant. I don't think we should throw everything away, but I think we need people with a mindset of contributing more collectively, more collaborative behaviour sets coming out, a real kind of openness and trustworthiness within business to underpin everything moving forward. And we also have to consider this is not just about our permanent workers anymore. I know Sharon has put a couple of questions on the Q&A there, and there's a big piece of research, Sharon, this year, which I've done, which I could probably send you separately, which answers much of your questions there around this trend, which seems to have crept up around the rise of the independent workers, because recruiters also need to look for the same values and behaviors in them to build them as part of valued pseudo employees for our businesses moving forward. So I think there's the two dimensions. First of all, it's the workforce mix, and then it's the overall values and behaviors that we're looking for, which then create that culture which is right for the 21st century, if you like, or the 2020s and beyond.
I suppose that's going to be a bit of a challenge for people moving forward. And also because not only am I a tech guy, I'm an obsessional data person, so I look at data a lot, but how do the managers actually have kind of hard data around some of these? And I hate to, because I get told off, and I'm right to rightly say, not the soft skills, because none of these things are soft skills. It's the other way around. These are the social skills. These are the moments. These are the skills. But of course, they are the harder ones to put a finger on, I would imagine, as a manager or as a leader, when you don't meet the people. So if you're recruiting people and they're remote and you're onboarding people remotely and you're moving to this remote thing, I mean, I know lots of teams like Buffer, great friend of mine who started that company. I think there are 182 of them now, and they've all been remote hires. Very, very successful. But of course, they're a tech company. Not everyone on the call is going to be a tech company. And I suppose it's almost, maybe we're all kind of maybe transitioning more and more towards becoming like tech companies. And we've got to think more agilely. And I'm going to let Jeremy chip in because I think he has something to say.
Yeah. Well, he just reminded me of a great company in the recruitment space, which set up an app called Blanc, which they propose is the Tinder for recruitment. and their algorithms are designed to match values, behaviors, right down to cultural level, as much as, if you like, the profile of the organization, whereby then that leads to a very quick initial selection process, video drops onto the app, and then 5-minute video speed interviews. So kind of like, I mean, they've really embraced the Tinder bit, I have to say. But it seems to be having a difference. So they've reimagined what that looked like. Going back to one of the previous questions, a piece of technology that enables the process doesn't overwhelm it.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and with some of we've got quite a few recruitment partners on the call today as well. And I know that they're using Flock as part of their technology stack. And I think, and I was saying to, just name drop, of course, I was talking to Robert Craven the other day about how growing your digital agency, but and I was on a podcast with him. And my whole point was those agencies, their technology stack will actually become their unique selling point. And a lot of people didn't quite get that. They don't, and they still don't. And don't get me wrong, even in digital marketing arenas, people are scared by that proposition because they're saying, well, we need to pick the right tools and that will make our unique selling point for our business. Well, actually, yeah, that will be part of it. Not only your people, but that will also be part of it. And also how you use AI. And that was the question I was going to ask, but I'm not going to because it's such a massive question. I think we'll overrun. So I'm not going to ask that question. I'm just going to hand it over to Michaela as well to be able to answer the last one. But I'm going to hold on to that AI question for another webinar, if that's okay, because it's an awesome question. Okay,
so we have a topic for the next webinar already.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a brilliant one about AI and about that thinking. But okay.
So I love that question because that's what we do at Flock. And I think rather than just talking about values in general, we need to take a step back and see what values have we got within our team. What is our team driven by? Because you might find out that because we work with a number of companies within the same industry, and we found that they had a completely different cultures. So if they recruited for a certain value, one of them would fit to one company and it would be completely opposite in the other company. So I think whenever you recruit, what's important to do before is to find out what's the dynamics of your team, and then how the candidates will impact your existing culture. Will they help you drive your culture towards the desired state, or will they stop you? And so, there's a couple of values that we see people are recruiting more for, which is being like transparent and caring. Now communication is key because there's so many things that's are uncertain. If you don't communicate them, if you're not transparent about them, people assume the worst anyway. So you really need people who relate and are being transparent. And there's this interesting piece of research from neuroscience. So it says that people who feel uncertainty produces the most anxiety, even more than the pain itself. So if you don't, provide people with the information, they'll feel anxious, they will, feel uncertain, and they'll assume the worst anyway. So I think the key is to, whatever information it is, the key is to communicate it anyway.
And this always links into the feedback loops and the other things that Jeremy's talking about, and how you have a new way of becoming a manager, stroke leader, stroke inner CEO. You see, there you go, inner CEO. And I think that it's a really, really good point. I was just about to kind of conclude with some of the thinking around it, but I think you guys have done a brilliant point of answering that question. Are there any other particular questions that have caught your eye in the chat box? There are so many. And by the way, thanks everyone, not only for coming on the call, but for asking such amazing questions, because they are so good that it's like, okay, now we know what we're going to be talking about for the next few years. Well, in COVID terms, of course, that means weeks, because everything's so quick, but certainly the next couple of months. Also a quick one on from our side of things, if that's okay, from a Flock point of view, because sometimes this is misunderstood and it's our fault for not being able to communicate this properly. And it's truly my fault. What we talk about when we talk about values, we don't talk about brand values. Yeah, so you might, from a marketing point of view, you might say, oh, well, our brand values are integrity, something else, creativity, and da-da-da. Now, it's a funny stat that about 55% of Fortune 100 companies have integrity as one of their brand values, yeah? So we're not talking about marketing brand values, because we all say the same thing. Guess what? All we want to be, are we going to be agile? Are we disruptive? All these guys. And don't get me wrong, I'm not belittling brand values. They're very important, yeah, from a marketing point of view. What we're talking about here with values are the 8 deterministic factors around the individual's personality. And that's why you have to do the values test, or the value survey as we call it, because that value survey then creates the profile, the individual's profile, yeah, which then links into creating a culture map or a team map. And that's why it's really, really powerful and really important. So we're not talking about your brand values and what you're trying to teach your employees to be. We're talking about actually what do they self-report themselves to be like. And that is a huge distinction. It may not fit. It felt like it was a huge distinction to start off with, but you're both looking at me like it was the most obvious thing I could say. So sorry, I thought it was really profound. I thought it was being Zen-like, but it feels like I've turned up to a gunfight with a knife on that one. But anyway,
can I just add to that, Dan? Because I you know, as somebody who's come into, if you like, the Flock family in terms of utilizing the tool, also with my clients as well, it's really coming of age right now. This is the kind of operational tool which is needed as the glue for many of the organizations who are making this transition now, and also is a great management tool to use for their teams. Tim posed a question around sort of repurposing management. I think it's a big question, that, but tools like this help them to create collectively with their team the right environment and culture so that they can actually adapt to what the way of working is now and move forward. And I think that's where we'll start to see much more empowerment happening, much more trust within our organizations, and fewer management layers within organizations. So that kind of is part of the answer to what Tim was saying, and repurpose management who actually enable and support these people to do it. So a tool like Flock right now really does the job in terms of helping that transition and moving into the next normal.
I just not only, of course, do I love the fact you said Flock does a great job to that, and thank you very much for using it for your recruitment and your drive as well. Very kind of you, because that's why I invested in it, and that was the point of it. But I think the other thing is, you know, we're not necessarily trying to get rid of that sticky middle or frozen middle, as it's saying there. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on those people, and I'm hoping that Flock helps those people, helps HR specialists, especially culture people who've got culture in their title, or people in their title, because that's going to become an increasingly hard job when it's done remotely, and it's not their fault. It's just, this is the new normal, and it's going to be trickier to do. So utilize technologies, man. I mean, I was just joking with a friend of mine, you know, if you're an accountant and, you know, an Excel comes along, you've got a couple of choices there. You can either say, oh no, not for me, I'm going to use a calculator and do it on paper, and that's what I've always done. And people said that. They said it for years. And then, you know, that was obviously a bit silly because Excel and other things became very useful. And of course, we're now looking at things like Xero and QuickBooks and whatever. So there's a whole ecosystem, I think. You're right, Jeremy. There's a whole ecosystem around technology that helps those individuals. But I'm going to let Mikkel finish off, because we've just seen the time. I tell you what, I'd love to have this talk all day. Don't know about anyone else, but there we go. Not all day. Go on, Mikkel.
Yeah, so, you know, I think it comes back to the same point that, you know, we're used to this old operating system when we've got KPIs, we need to deliver work, but now culture becomes more important. And we need a similar framework for that. How do you manage culture? How do you make sure you stick to the values that you have? You know, is there anything that you do? And, you know, so we worked recently with this company, and they delivered a simple 5-step process of how they're going to do it. And they just used Flock as a framework to measure that over time. And I think, you know, regardless you use Flock or not, I think this is the great time, if you don't have it yet, to give, you know, a simple tool to your managers that will allow them and enable them to manage their cultures and actually understand what culture means. There's so many people who've got different, you know, definitions of culture. How do you have this one holistic definition? But anyway, so I think we've gone through most of the questions. Or is there any more?
There was one point that was just made, and I think Jeremy also covered it, but someone just asked around games and how games can help bring people together, and how that kind of, they could kind of show how people react in certain situations. I think that's, you know, that may be why I think games sometimes existed. You know, did we show our culture by the fact we played cricket and apparently that was fair play in certain areas? I don't know. That sounds like a past that may be through rose-tinted, but you know, the reality of playing games together is a big one. And I think there may become a time very soon where I was just going to talk about esports stuff the other day, but we might find that, you know, remote teams start playing things like esports together, start playing things like League of Legends together as a team, rather than them all playing football together. Because, and this is the bit that I really wanted to talk about today, but we didn't have time, this whole piece about diversity and inclusion. You know, remote working allows this to be blown open. We can't be saying, oh, well, sorry, you can't come in. You know, What? Because if someone's disabled, that you can now hire them. There's no way you can't. There's no reason for having any of this discrimination now, apart from, sadly, your own biases, but also confirmation bias, maybe of pieces of technology. I think this remote working piece could be a tremendous boost for our economy, because it unlocks the potential of huge numbers of bits of society that we didn't normally tap into. That is going to be for a different talk, because that's going to be our next talk. Our next talk is going to be around diversity and inclusion, and can we utilize the power of this cultural changes that's happening as we see it. I'm hoping that we're going to have Sandy Lindsay on the call, MBE, on that call. I've got a couple of diversity and inclusion specialists, Amy Newton, and some other people that are going to be on that call as well. And I'm really hoping that a neurodiversity champion will also be on that call, because I think that's one of the key ones for me, neurodiversity as well. It's not just about age and race and sex and all these other things. It's actually getting the best people on team. And if we can get more and more people to the table, I think we're all going to benefit. I think the only thing that I'd love us all to do is maybe have the same values and the same purposes and the same drive, because if you can do that, I think we can create a massive amount of productivity, which we're going to need to get us out of this the economic slump. Let's be frank about it. This revolution will be needed economically. So, trying to be economic words, but failing massively, I'm going to give a huge thanks. And I don't know. I'm going to go round of applause. I'm sorry you don't do that nowadays, because I'm sorry it is horribly on your microphone. So, a massive round of applause. Thank you to Jeremy for it as well. Of course, Mikhail, of course, but more importantly to our keynote and our key speaker. If people would like to connect with you, Jeremy, what is the best way for them to learn about how they can unlock their own inner CEO?
They can connect with me on LinkedIn straight away. And they can drop me a mail. I know there's a couple that want some of that research. I think Sharon mentioned that she'd like some more on the blended workforce, which I can pick up with you separately, Sharon. I'll just pop that in the chat if you like. And I think those are the two best ways really these days, aren't they?
LinkedIn, as always, tradition. I love the fact that people are LinkedIn. Please do not use TikTok. Only joking. I've been asked to go on board about TikTok. Makes me smile. But that's a different point. Mikhail, how is it best that people? We're surely going to communicate with people about Flock. How are we going to get back into contact with them?
Yeah, so we will follow up with an email where we can include Jeremy's profile for LinkedIn as well, our profile, so feel free to connect with us. We've also recently released a new way of profiling culture, and we would love your feedback.